Hello, everybody, and welcome to Take Your Time, Persona podcast where you play through Persona 3 Reload in just unnecessarily real time along with the in-game calendar dates. I'm Tom Marks, joined as always by Jonathon Dornbush. Jonathan.
Tom, I could make the same joke we've been making, but I'm not going to do it. I want the listeners out there to be proud of me for not saying the same thing we've been saying the last few weeks. So I'm doing great, and I'm excited to talk about other things this week.
Yes, this week we've got a little bit of a zig, which is a Q&A. We've been asking the last couple of weeks for folks questions because this is a good opportunity to do this. We want to be filling this time with episodes. Obviously, the elephant in the room, getting it out of the way. Technically the week of February 16th to 22nd, but it's all still skipped time until we hit March 4th in the game. The last thing I should also talk about or mention about next week's episode is we had a little bit of a discussion on mid-show last time, but yes, the way we're doing it is that next week's episode is going to be the finale episode. It is going to involve the events of March 4th and 5th, I think it is, in-game, the actual end of the game, because that way we get to release the episode at the end on those dates, which I think is a lot more fitting than waiting a week and then talking about it and having another dead week. It just doesn't make as much sense. So in the interest of timeliness, we're going to be making next week's episode the final episode, which and before the Answer DLC, which will come at the end of March.
Yeah.
Makes sense?
I think so. I think it makes sense. Just play the end of the game, and we'll talk about it next week. There you go.
Well, I mean, maybe I'll wait until the day before we record.
Waiting.
I'll play it soon.
Yeah, it'll be a fun one. Yeah.
Yes, but today we, like I said, have a Q&A. We ask for questions. We want to talk about this game. We want to hear your thoughts or want to know what you want to hear about, that sort of stuff, especially with the sort of flip perspective of Jonathan having played it before and me going through it for the first time. So we've got that going on. Before we get there, though, thank you to everyone who submitted questions, and especially some of those questions came from patreon.com/takeyourtime. And we, for one of the final times, would like to thank everyone over there at the doing our Confidant call-out at the Palace Ruler tier, everyone who's supporting us over there. We really, we've said this multiple times. We said this at the beginning of the show a lot. It really blows me away, the support we got over at Patreon for this season. So we really, really want to say thank you. And those folk at the Palace Ruler tier are Bob and Tim 64, Brody S, Cameron C, Claudia R, Dallas, Damon, Dan, Danimal Lover, Default Titus, Dexter, Caitlin E, Keegan H, Mad Attack, Michael V, P King, Programmer Sid, Sam K, Sarah M, Shade, Something Witty, Willy Wang Wang, getting mixed up there, and Zachary L. So thank you again to all of those folk. We are, as I've said the last few times, pausing the Patreon once this season ends, once the last episode goes live. So I would do the plug here. I guess if you want to go ahead, but probably don't.
For your sake, probably don't. It does, of course.
But thank you.
Yeah, thank you. But, don't worry about it.
Send us a nice note. Leave a nice comment on the YouTube or something, and that'll feed our souls in a way dollars cannot.
Also, with that in mind, I don't quite know how it's going to work, so there might be some fine-tuning, figuring out things. I don't, Tom and I have not talked about this off the air. I don't see the intention immediately to obviously unvault all the stuff that y'all have been supporting us and paid for over those months, because that was part of the benefit. We will figure out maybe a time in the future. I realize maybe pausing the Patreon might cause you to lose access to some of that stuff. Hopefully it doesn't, but we can kind of figure that out as we go. But obviously I want to make sure people who enjoyed that stuff can go back to it. But yeah.
So let us know. But until then, let's take some questions. Let's talk about this game more, because there's still more to talk about, believe it or not.
Well, this game, as well as we got a medley of questions of other things, but I think it might be best to start on topic.
Us? No. That
Shocking,
doesn't sound like us.
Well, before we derail ourselves, maybe a silly question we'll start with, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of things.
Sure.
Bob and Tim 64 did ask over on the Patreon, silly question, but do you think Aigis and Sophia would get together as friends? And what would be their favorite activities to do together?
this is for anybody who didn't play Persona 5 Strikers. You should do that.
Yes.
Sophia being the AI in that game. Yeah, I feel like they'd be buds.
I think
they
so.
follow not identical but similar feeling trajectories in their in their non-lives.
I feel like they would very much start out as like classic kind of probably anime trope of they fight first and then realize they have something in common and then would come together and be best pals. Like it would be one of those not enemies to lovers, but like enemies to pals sort of trope.
Yeah.
And then they would go off on adventures together, yeah.
I feel like Aigis would be a lot more defensive than Sophia would.
Yeah.
I think Sophia would be open to friendship quicker. And seriously, if anybody hasn't played Strikers, we did a whole bonus season about it, 1.5 or whatever we called it. And that game is, if you played P5, it is just a sequel. You got to, kind of get over the fact that it's not turn-based combat, but beyond that, it is just a sequel and it's super cool. And Sophia is, I think, outside of main cast of main game, probably my favorite kind of added character in that way.
Sure.
In Persona that I've seen at least so far. She's delightful.
She's great. Yeah. She's totally a joy and I think works really well in that game. And I do think, yeah, to your point, obviously they have similar archetypes here, but I do think they'd get along. I think it would be a very fun kind of, this is just getting into fan fiction territory, but like the two of them kind of exploring the real world and coming to understand the human nature of things. I think like the two of them together with just one random person here and there, like from either party, it interspersed would make for a fun series of fan fictions that probably exist, I would have to guess.
Probably.
But yeah.
Yeah. Also, worth noting, similar ideas, but definitely don't feel derivative of each other within the... Like, you could probably say Junpei and Ryuji were closer in character than those two, probably. And I don't even particularly, after having played through P3, find those Junpei and Ryuji... I keep wanting to say Ryoji. As, like, identical or anything either, so...
No, totally. I think, yeah, it's very fair warning. It's, again, one of those things where, obviously, the Persona series likes to play with sort of exact archetypes, not to keep going from metaphor, but the character specifics become very different as you get into them. Yeah, absolutely.
Yes, I think that's spot on.
Yeah. But I think they'd be good pals. Mm-hmm. Can't wait to see whatever AI we get introduced to in Persona 6. Or, we'll see.
AI or dog or both.
Yes. An AI
dog?
Yeah. What was that one that was in the early 2000s? The like toy robot dog that you could get?
Aibo?
I think Aibo. Yeah, that sounds right.
Well, maybe
it's one of those.
Well, Taibo was also a thing.
I'll look it up. I don't want to type too much. My computer is loud. But anyway, that's what I'm envisioning as our party member. Moving on from that to perhaps a series of fun questions that Sarah over in the Patreon shared with us, a list of sort of superlatives about the game, which I thought would be a fun way to kind of get into things. So they have a whole list. We'll see how long it takes us or if we have to jump ship at any point. But starting at the first, and obviously it's okay if you don't know names, favorite song in the game.
Oh, you go first.
Okay.
I'll think.
It's really difficult for me. I think I gravitate toward the final battle music as a emotional favorite because of the way that it brings in the other themes in the game. Like, I think the fact that that theme is able to integrate these other ideas into it really works as a culminating of the game itself. And so there's something that I admire about that. I think it works really well from the standpoint of that's not a short battle. And so it has to keep you engaged throughout. So the fact that the song kind of has stages to it as well as the boss works really, really well. But beyond that, I'm trying to think of like, that one almost feels like an easy gimme for me. I'm trying to think if there's another that immediately comes to mind. But do you have one?
I think this is gonna, maybe this is cop-out. I don't know if it's cop-out.
Okay.
I'm gonna go with just the walking around music. Walking around town during the day. But specifically, because I like this track so much because it does change depending on where you are, which area you're in, if you go into buildings, that sort of things. specifically the version of it that plays when you go to like the shops and it sort of slows down a little bit and gets a little bit like a little bit more groovy. I really like that version.
The version, specifically the remix of it, I know what you're talking about. The one that happens when you go into the police station is so funky and good. I love it so much. That one might be up there for me as well. Like, I get what you mean by cop-out, but I don't think it is. It's hard for me with this one because the biggest compliment I can give this soundtrack is going in. I had such high expectations after loving Five's score so much, and to love this soundtrack as much as I do. It's really good. I really like the soundtrack a lot.
Yeah.
Favorite C's character?
C specifically.
C's specifically. That was hard to say.
Well, I don't know, because it's sort of different than our tier list last week.
It is, yeah.
It's like a slightly different question.
But is it still Koromaru?
I don't think it is.
No, it wouldn't be for me either.
Well, then you go ahead.
Okay. I would genuinely, it might be, especially after the second playthrough, I kind of am a little bit surprised in myself for it, but I think it might be Junpei, just because I think the fact of his arc works so well for me, and to the point where I did start out actively not liking that character and kind of wishing, oh, I can't wait till I get new party members. And to be so on his side and so a fan of what they did with the character, I admired that the most, but I don't know if that counts as favorite.
I think it might be Akihiko for me.
Ooh, yeah.
Which is not what I was expecting to feel.
Yeah.
Because I like them all so much, but there's something about Akihiko that just I really enjoy his sort of. He's hot-headed at times. He's level-headed at other times. He has a very sort of strong sense of what he believes in. He's also very humble, despite being very popular and successful in what he does.
Yeah.
And then also I like that he is an idiot sometimes, that he has flaws, right? That he's not just the cool dude who's always cool and always on point and never flustered. Like the idea that in the beach scene, as silly as that whole scene is, that he comes in and is like kind of overconfident and then also a dweeb,
freezes
essentially.
Up, can't do it. Yeah, it's really good.
It's charming. It's endearing, and I think I just root for Akihiko. I really like that guy.
He's up there for me too. There's something about his presence and like full, kudos to, I think, both the voice acting and the writing there, where he feels like a great guy. Yeah. Mm-hmm. Like someone I really appreciate as being part of the team.
Yeah.
He would definitely be up there for me. But yeah, I'll stick with Junpei for now just because it's a fun one. Favorite social link?
Well, so this is the thing of there's weirdness,
yes.
You said, right? Where more stuff happens.
I would say like you will get a fuller understanding of characters, with the end of the game. You have that opportunity. I would say like if you enjoyed, levels 1 through 10 of anyone in particular, Suimitsu, of course. There's also the weird wrinkle too of we don't know how the portable social links stack up.
Yeah.
And I did finally see a full list of them. Shout out to someone dropped them in the YouTube comments, even though I know they're available in a lot of places, but Claudia put them up and I was like, oh, I want to play portable. I need to see these social links. But yeah, it is a tough one, but I think even without the ending, I'm sure you have like a favorite one or two, or one that you enjoy more.
Yuko is up there, I'd say.
Yeah.
I really do like Yuko, and I liked sort of how sweet her story was. It was very simple and very just sort of straightforward, but touching, I guess is the right way to put it. I think Yuko's definitely up there for me. As weird as this is, just liked Maya as a strange sort of unexpected thing. I think Kamiki is another one of the examples of one where I loved, but probably would have absolutely put it at my top if it was 5 scenes
Sure.
instead of 10.
Yeah.
Just because that, it's padded at times, but that's fine. That's the nature of the game. Yeah, I think those are sort of up there for me. Those are the ones that are up there for me. And there is like a weird morbid Suimitsu is so insane that it did kind of love it at the end.
Yeah. I mean, I think for me, the one it's obvious is Tanaka.
Get out of here.
Just classic, all-timer. No, for me, probably it is Kamiki. Just because of, to your point, I definitely agree. It is repetitive and I think would have been stronger if there were a few shorter ones. But especially the first process of playing that one and seeing it through to the end and kind of where it goes and not knowing it was going to go that way. And I really enjoyed it. I will say I am influenced by the end of the game somewhat in the overall ranking of my social links. But yeah, that one's probably up there for me.
Yeah.
Cool. Favorite boss fight?
Oh. There was, I think again the cop out of this is the end.
Yeah, I'm kind of there too.
It's real good. That final fight is very fun, even if, as we talked about previously, it's not necessarily like the hardest thing in the world. It is just very cool. It's got spectacle in a way the others just don't.
Totally. Yeah.
Largely. Yeah, I mean that's where my head goes. Again, that might be the cop out answer though.
That's fair. I to be fair, cop out wise, like I'm in the same place. I don't think almost any of them stack up to that final fight for me, both in terms of intrigue and emotionality, all that sort of stuff. Yeah.
The other one that sort of sticks in my brain when I'm thinking about it is the one where it's the tank and then you split them up.
Yes. Yeah.
And you have to sort of juggle that process of splitting them up and dealing damage, and then they go back to like that. That I think is that was mechanically interesting to me. That one for sure.
That's fair. I would say if you take away the final boss fight, that one's really great, and then the roulette one I do enjoy because those you really have to keep track of your weaknesses and what's being repelled and all that, and just the emotional turn that boss battle takes, I think is really well done. Yeah.
Sure. Yeah.
Cool. So these next couple, I do think obviously could be impacted by what you like or don't like about the ending, but do you have a favorite story moment and a most shocking story moment?
Well, I mean, Shinji dying is pretty shocking.
Yeah.
Shinji dying, again, we've talked about this in the show before, but the poker face that this game plays is very good. Putting weapons in the stores that, like, there's a weapon in the antique store that we talked about where it's so good and so exciting, and I don't think you ever have the opportunity to actually let him use it, right? Because the things it needs are after he dies. I think maybe I'm wrong about that, or at least they're exceptionally rare before he dies. So I think that I was definitely expecting him to die, but I was absolutely not expecting him. Like, they set up the idea that he's dying already. I didn't think he was just gonna die right there in the middle of the game or whatever.
Yeah.
So that was definitely, I think that was probably up there. A top story moment in general, the whole Chidori, Junpei, that scene is just really good.
Yeah.
And it's very emotional, and kind of the fallout of that is really, really interesting. So yeah. And like in terms of other twists, I saw Akutsuki coming a mile away. So
you did. Yes. Yeah,
that wasn't a shock.
You're fine. I will say though
that was really exciting though when that happened. So
I was going to say that whole rooftop encounter for me, definitely not most shocking, because I'm with you in the sense of it makes sense of the Akutsuki turn, and it's not exactly very hidden, but that is also, I think, just such a great story moment. One, with his kind of descent into chaos and madness, and the just kind of abject horror of Mitsuru's dad dying in the midst of all this. Like, this guy who's just kind of caught up in it because of his past family misdeeds, and he's actually trying to do right by things, but all this sort of stuff. I think that whole rooftop scene is really, really well done.
Yeah, they really give him an eye patch and make you want to think he's the bad guy, right?
Yep.
Like they do that too. This game, I think games are bad at bluffing a lot of times.
Totally.
And this game does a pretty good job bluffing some big story stuff. Like I saw Akutsuki coming, but I don't think that you like, not to brag or whatever. I don't think that the game is trying to make you see that coming necessarily.
No.
And similarly, like, you can see Shinji dying coming, but then they twist it. You can see Ryoji being something important coming, but then they twist it again in a way that I was not expecting. And I think this game is very good at that.
Totally.
And so there's a lot of moments I could point to that were surprising and fun in that way.
Yeah. God, I just kind of want to talk to you for an hour about like games being bad at bluffing, because I totally agree with you. And it's very funny to think like, yeah, games are about as good as an episode of Law and Order when a very famous person comes on. It's like, who could the killer be?
Yeah. There's an episode. Did we talk about that? I think we already talked about this. There was an episode of Monk where Willie Nelson is on it, and you think he's the killer the whole time, but then he's not. And it's like, that would have been such a better twist if he just was.
It would be so funny. And he gets away with it. You just see him in the background, meddlesome. That'd be really funny. Last but not least, one thing you would change about the game.
Oh, that's a fascinating question. Only one?
Just one. You got to pick one.
I mean, change is such an interesting word because, you know, I think an answer to this that I would not accept is like, I wish it had palaces, because that's a little bit more than just changing one thing. Right?
I agree. Yeah. I have a brief one in mind.
Yeah.
I think it's that this might fall a little bit into that category, but I think making maybe some of the school life stuff matter slightly more or feel more endemic, I guess, to what you're doing. Like, I think we talked a fair bit about how, you know, stuff like the track meet is built up to be this really big thing, and then it just kind of happens. Or the fact of like, when you do get those great moments with all the kids hanging out together, I kind of wish there were a few more of those. Like, if I could pick one thing that's, I guess, a somewhat relatively easier change, it would be to have more of the idea of like that student hangout life that we see.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good one, because I think generally mine would also be like, I wish this game, it feels like one of the symptoms of it being an older game is that it puts way more emphasis on the quote-unquote gameplay. Like, I think it wants you to be in Tartarus a lot, probably. And it is afraid to distract you too much from having control, I guess is the right way to put it. That's why, in my eyes, you get a lot of evenings after story events happen. There's not a lot of times where Morgana is telling you to go to sleep. And I think, to be clear, I think you could easily argue that Persona 5 went too far the other direction and put you too much on rails in story stuff, or took control away from you too often. Not always, not to like a destructive degree, but they sort of admitted it in Royal, because they make Morgana make you go to sleep a lot less, and they loosen the reins a little bit there. But this game, I think I wish it was a little less afraid to spend time on story things that felt a little more on rails, because a consistent complaint I had throughout the entire time was like, big story event happens, amazing revelation, hey, go to school for 3 days and I guess maybe we'll talk about it at some point, right?
Yeah.
Like, I think that did happen a lot of times, where Shinji would die and then Ken would go crazy and nobody would talk about it for a little bit, or you would only talk about it in side optional conversations. I feel like that is my answer, is I wish this game took longer, even if that meant taking control away, to sort of unpack some of its biggest moments or
Sure.
important revelations.
Yeah.
And I don't need like tons of repetition about that. I just wanted some moments of reflection the next day after some of these events, and you just don't always get that, or you do, but it's a week later in game because there's other things going on.
Yeah. No, I totally get what you mean, and I think we've definitely jumped into that as the weeks have gone by. I think a little bit to your point, there is probably some of that does come down to the age in which this game was originally made, because I think you're right man, I imagine the version of the story, if it were able to be told for the first time now, and like this is such a great version of it, who knows if they had kind of like those constraints of the PS2 era kind of taken off them, what it would be like. But yeah, I totally get where you're coming from on that. Yeah. Cool. Well, Sarah, thank you for all of those. They left us a few also, but those I think will work well for our bonus episode, actually. They tie in there, so we'll include those there. To move on from that one, Mark had 2 questions for us. The first one is, which of the Hoshino games that you guys have played, so Royal, P3R, and Metaphor, would you recommend to newcomers as the best place to start?
Oh, that's a fascinating question.
Yeah.
For me, it is about what you expect from an RPG, I guess. If your tolerance for slow RPGs is higher, I would do Persona 5.
Yeah.
Because I think Persona 5 is still, I haven't finished P3 yet, obviously, but I think Persona 5 is still my preference over P3, and probably my preference over Metaphor too, even though I absolutely love Metaphor and love so many of the gameplay changes Metaphor makes. But there's just something about P5 that really has stuck with me as time has gone on. And I think Royal is the place where I think that game is accessible enough and eases you into what it's doing very, very well, and is so good that it absolutely is recommendable to someone, but I wouldn't recommend it to someone who's going into RPGs cold, who is used to a 30-hour RPG, who's used to only Western Skyrim-style RPGs. Like, you kind of need to build up to that. And in that case, I think I would recommend Metaphor. Mm-hmm. Because I think that game feels a little bit more video gamey, maybe is the right way to put it. And P5 is like, if you're used to RPGs, it doesn't really matter. You'll be fine with that. You'll be fine with P5. But if the idea of you don't really get control over what you're doing until about hour 15 or 20, if that is off-putting, I wouldn't try to force it upon someone. I think Metaphor would get you into the action and get you going quicker.
That's fair. Yeah, P3... obviously, as not to pick apart at what you said, but as I guess the one that you wouldn't recommend for newcomers. It's tough because I really do think where we are in age and time, reload is such an interesting piece. And I say this obviously as someone who didn't play P3 before. So if you have a different perspective on it, I would love to hear it, especially if you'd played P3 before. But knowing how much of what reload redoes is informed by the success of 5, I think is a very interesting place to come from. And, having that knowledge and then being able to experience the story and these characters and all that, I think made me appreciate some of it perhaps even a little bit more, because I understood that this was, one, a refresh, but also a story that had been told years and years before, and gameplay that had been established years and years before. So as much as I do love this game, and I we'll talk about where it falls for me, I do think starting with 5 Royal makes more sense to me as well. But I would still then recommend going on to this one after. Metaphor, I think if you just kind of want a fresh start, or that's definitely one where if you're more into high fantasy, I think on a genre or tone level, I guess it is very easy to say, do you love wizards and elves and sort of sword and shield stuff? Go that way first. But if you want something more modern, P5 would be the way too. Yeah. Yeah,
that is a funny part of it too, because it's funny to think about Metaphor as I don't know about that style, when really modern day Japan is absolutely the weird outlier style, but like just coming from a Persona background, you're like, oh man, they're going dragons? How weird.
It was,
you know,
it was so
it's like,
funny to be like, I don't know if this is going to work. And it's like, of course it's going to work. We've been doing these for decades. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah, I think you're right. It's definitely also that is part of it. I know a modern day RPG is off-putting to some people, conceptually as well. And,
Sure.
And in that case, fantasy makes an easier runway.
Yeah. Well, speaking of, which game series would you recommend to Persona fans who haven't played many other RPGs? And I think, Tom, you might be a little bit better equipped to answer this one than me, but
Interesting question.
yeah.
Which does it have to be RPG?
I mean, they suggested game series.
Yeah.
But who haven't played many other RPGs kind of indicates to me other RPGs. But, you know, if you have an RPG.
A super easy answer is like Fire Emblem Three Houses, right?
Yeah.
Because the Fire Emblem series is phenomenal. Three Houses was the one that basically cribbed Persona ideas, right? They have like a little dating system in there, but point being, the Fire Emblem series, even before it sort of directly borrowed from Persona ideas with that sort of thing, always had similar vibes of getting this huge party of named characters and learning about them and having bonds between them, and so that is, oh god, what is the latest Fire Emblem? I keep blanking.
Is it
I always blank on the name.
Engage?
Yes, Fire Emblem Engage. So for anybody who hasn't played Fire Emblem games, they're great. The very funny, interesting thing is that Fire Emblem Three Houses is like one of the best stories they've done, right? It is so, if story is important to you, that's the great place to be. And the levels, the combat is like good, but not the best the series has ever done. Whereas Fire Emblem Engage, which was the game that came after it, is some of the absolute best combat Fire Emblem has ever done. Incredible. And the story was so bad I could barely tolerate it. Like, they are literally mirror images of each other, where it's like, if you just want really incredible tactical fights, get Engage. And if you want really fun, cool story with a school life sort of theme to it, you get Three Houses. So Fire Emblem, I think, is my go-to here of just, that seems like a pretty good recommendation for any Persona fan if you have not already played those.
Yeah, no, that makes total sense. I really need to get back to Three Houses. After all of these podcasting experiments, I'm like, I feel like I would love that game now if I played it.
Yeah, probably. I mean, Three Houses is really, really cool. The like biggest knock against it is that it's really long. It's like almost, but that's not really like a bad thing necessarily or whatever.
No. But yeah, no, I think that's a really, really great suggestion. One that I've not played but does feel probably a easy place to go, especially if you like the modern day stuff, is, since they've taken to the turn-based RPG system, the Like a Dragon games, knowing how well Seven and Infinite Wealth have been received. If you like that type of combat with a sprawling story, obviously there's very different flavors there too, but that feels like a natural. I honestly, once we finish 3 and once I'm done with Metaphor, I'm jumping into those. So that's kind of where I'm going. But yeah,
no, that is also a very clean jump, I'd say.
Yeah. And if you just want a game series about how wonderful it is to have your friends along with you, you can't go wrong with Kingdom Hearts. Am I right, Tom?
Did they ever make a turn-based Kingdom Hearts?
Because
there was one, the card one or something had like, it was like real time with pause, right? Like you could flip through.
So there
was one that did that.
You had the card system in Chain of Memories, which is, I think, an spoken fantastic entry in the series. The 2D version, not the 3D version. This is another podcast. But anyway,
that is the key there.
Yes, legitimately. Oh, go ahead.
Well, because they in, what was it? It was Kingdom Hearts. This is a total tangent.
Yeah.
In Kingdom Hearts, what was it, 1.5 plus 2.5, whatever, the collection, they put in the Chain of Memories that was the 3D remake.
Yeah.
And that game is like just so not worth playing compared to the 2D one.
Yeah, it's cool for the cutscenes to get to see those moments fully rendered.
Sure.
But gameplay-wise, they did a PS2 essentially remake or redo of it. It
Of a
loses
3DS game originally.
it was a GBA. Chain of Memories
That's how
was on
old-
GBA. Yeah.
Chain of Memories was Game Boy Advance?
I'm pretty sure. Now you're having me doubt myself, but I'm pretty sure, yeah.
I wither into dust. I thought it was at least DS.
Yeah, it was GBA.
Oh my god.
So all I can say is, especially for people who have heard me talk about it, if you are interested in the Kingdom Hearts franchise, yes, if you buy the collection, there is a version of Chain of Memories on there that you can play. Find a way to play it on the Game Boy Advance version.
Yeah.
Whatever way you need to, I'm not saying, but go find a way to play it, because I think, one, the art style is so good in that game. I think it is a beautiful GBA game. And I just think the card system combat in there works better on that kind of 2D plane than it does in 3D. The PS2 3D version feels sparse. It feels like it's missing an energy to it. It is way better on Game Boy. Yeah.
Yeah, well, because they basically just used
The
like
Kingdom
the
Hearts
Kingdom
1
Hearts
assets.
1 and 2 stuff and just
Yeah.
like remade it, and it's like a classic example of misunderstanding the appeal of a game when doing a remake.
Yeah.
Right? Misunderstanding why that game stood out when they were going to, and just saying, well, 3D is newer and better than 2D, so it must be nicer. And it's like, well, but the original had such cool pixel art. The
Yeah.
original was so cool looking, and yeah, because there's some games that just do that where they go from 2D to 3D, not because they should.
Yeah, it just feels like they're compelled to. I will say, I think, I can totally see, it's funny, I can absolutely see the business reasons why that happened, but man, Chain of Memories on GBA is really great. Also, just, I guess, kind of a side thing, but if you are someone who didn't play turn-based stuff as much and are getting into it via these games, and you're a Nintendo fan, genuinely the Paper Mario and Mario and Luigi games are really fantastic turn-based RPGs, especially the older ones, unfortunately, but they're mostly accessible now these days via a lot of ways. So,
Thousand Year Door, the Thousand Year Door remake that came out in last year, 2024, that is for Switch is really good, and that game holds up. It is still fantastic, and those games, I think it's a good shout. The Paper Mario games are a good shout because you wouldn't think it if you haven't played them, but those are party-based RPGs. You get a big party of characters that travel around with you and are full of personality and have little stories, and they are that, right?
It's surprisingly deep in those departments you wouldn't probably expect when someone says Mario RPG, but those are really great. And then just, I'm a big fan of especially the first trilogy of Mario and Luigi RPGs. Those are really fantastic as well. But
yeah,
there's no shortage, but yeah, cool.
There you go.
Moving on from there, just to get into a couple last few ones. Speaking of, I guess, just what we were saying, a little bit more off topic, but Metaphor asked, and I guess it's good to give an update before we're at the end of the season. Metaphor asked if we've both finished Metaphor.
Not yet.
I
really, really need to, and I really, really want to, but I have been so busy recently, and so just sort of like, there was that bout of sickness. There was the holidays, and I barely played any video games, and then there was a bout of sickness all through January, and then this is going up after it, so it'll be public by now, but all through February, I was reviewing the new Monster Hunter, so I was basically just playing that all month. So there's, it's been... I've been jumping from rock to rock on a lot of things recently.
Yeah, which is totally fair and understandable.
But I sometimes,
ahead.
real quickly, I will say, I sometimes fall off of games, and I'm like, at some point, I'm not going back to that. I really would like to go back to this one. I am very close to the end. I am very excited for the end, and I'm absolutely going to go back to it. Hopefully soon. Maybe after we're done recording.
Yeah, I legitimately am at the final boss. And I just also, part of me, it's again a thing of like timing. I'm like, I know there's going to be probably at least an hour of cutscenes after the final boss. I need to set aside an evening for this. And so I will probably finish it before we're done with this show. Very likely. That's almost inevitable. But I am nearing the end. Still absolutely love it. Obviously no spoilers, but man, what a game. What a triumph of a new start for them. And I just keep doing it. They've figured out some incredible twists to the formula that now I can't wait to see where they keep pushing things. But yeah.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving on from there, a very selfishly indulgent, silly one that I just wanted to mention because I appreciate it was asked here in this forum. Dan asked, can we get some of Jonathan's thoughts on the current season of Severance? I miss him and Mark Medina kicking off episodes of Podcast Beyond by talking about the show. It's what got me watching. And
I'm glad I watched the most recent episode last night.
Hell yeah, you did. Oh, man, the season's wild. No, I did just want to say, I appreciate you mentioning that because as I've been watching the second season, I've been like, oh yeah, I miss talking with Mark about this for the first 10 minutes of our PlayStation podcast every week. And a certain group of the fandom absolutely loving it and a certain group of listeners hating it. And it was very funny to me.
Well, you've got a Marks. Does that count?
I do. There you go. It's close. Don't tell Medina. But anyway, Severance is fantastic. I can't believe it's back and still as good as I would have hoped. Like, it's pretty wild.
It's pretty. This season is really cool because it's we'll avoid spoilers to be clear. This season is interesting because it's lost a little bit of the luster to me in that, you know, it's a little more known.
Yeah.
You have a better idea of what's going on, and sort of the appeal of the first season was this weird mystery that's going on, and it's different. It's a slightly different beast, but I agree. I think it's what they're doing is still really, really compelling and really, really cool and weird in the right ways. And, and just because, you know, it's not quite as fresh does not mean it's any worse necessarily in its production. It's one of... Man, it's so pretty. My wife is
fantastically shot. Yeah,
just sick of me because twice an episode I'm like, that's such a beautiful. That cinematography is amazing. Oh my god!
I do the same thing. Legitimately, almost after every episode, I think I go, "That was television." I'm like, yes. Art
like
is
an
back.
old-timey movie producer.
Really, that's how I feel watching the show sometimes. Where I'm like, am I just starved for TV like this right now? But it's like, God, this is good. Yeah,
yeah. And there's also of like every time I look at or like get recommended on Reddit like fan theories or whatever, I always realize the people are picking apart these teeny tiny details you wouldn't otherwise see that are always real.
Yeah,
like it's not just like there was a thing I saw an interview that was talking about how the creator, I can't remember his name, was saying that the thing with the goats, which is in season 1 and slight tiny spoilers, it comes back up in season 2. He said he was not allowed to put those in unless he had some sort of payoff in mind for why they existed, right? Which is, I think, really, like, this is the thing, is it doesn't feel like anything is just there to, everything is there to confuse you and make everything weird and unexpected, but it doesn't feel nonsensical. It does, or it feels nonsensical in a very intentional way. It's not like they're just doing it just only to mess with you.
Yeah.
And I really appreciate that sort of, you don't understand why this is going on, but it still feels like there is intent behind it.
Yeah. No, the intentionality of all these small details that people are able to pick up on and do pay off is so impressive because, yeah, to your point, and I say this as someone who loved Lost and is a big defender in many ways, but the show isn't doing the, like, we put a polar bear on the island because isn't that weird? Like, it is,
right.
They seem to have thought through every little detail here.
They sort of explained the polar bear thing at one point.
Yeah. Well, that Lost is another conversation. I do hold a lot of that show dearly, but we don't have time for that now.
I maintain Lost is a good show that was very dumb and bad at some points.
I do too. I love that show.
Both things. Both things are true.
We won't talk about Jack's tattoo episode ever again, but love that show to bits. Anyway, Severance is great. I really do appreciate you bringing it up. Dan did ask a question that I think works better for after we finish the game as well. Cool. So we'll save that. I think just to cap things off, Programmer Sid asked, I think, a very fitting question and said, I would like to know if Tom, having a couple weeks to think on it, has any new predictions for the end of the game.
Oh, not really.
Okay.
Honestly, like the pretty much what I said before is, or in terms of predictions, like, this is the thing that's fascinating to me is just based on, you have a pretty good poker face too. You don't have to hide yourself. The thing that I think stands out to me again, like similar to what I was talking about before, is like, based on my experience with Persona 5, if I wasn't doing this podcast and I hadn't finished the game yet, and even with the answer, knowing that there was the answer after this, I don't think I would expect anything except for like a "we did it" rap party, and that's it. And the only thing that's got me expecting something else is just the knowledge that there is probably something else, because we've been talking about it like that, and there is the answer, and there's this other stuff. So like, I don't know. I don't know what to expect, and I'm really excited about it because I don't really know what loose ends there are to tie up yet. I guess I'm just sort of like, again, this is what I was saying. This game does a good job of holding its cards close to its chest, and sometimes it's holding cards, but you don't know what they're going to be. Yeah, so I'm excited. It's hard to say.
Yeah, cool. I'll leave it there. I think that's a good ending. I think, yeah, we'll have plenty to discuss next week. I do appreciate everyone who wrote in with questions. We'll say, obviously, as we're getting into next week's episode, if you have questions about our reactions to the finale, if you have thoughts about the finale, please put those in this coming week. Kind of the spoiler of it all will be out there, so we'll be able to like talk about the ending and how that like maybe impacts the experience, maybe makes Tom hate it, maybe makes him like it more. We'll find out.
Okay. I'll make a wild prediction.
All right,
you ready? The Dark Hour comes back. Aegis rushes to save the whole team from something unexpected and gets trapped in the Dark Hour and has to fight her way out in episode Aegis. I don't know. That is not actually what I think is going to happen. It's just a guess. So there you go.
I like it. Well, we'll find out in just a few days.
Yes.
Yeah. But yeah, I think, thank you to everyone who wrote in. Again, we'll have some, I think, for next week as well, but really appreciate it.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been an absolute pleasure, and we're going to take some more questions next week, so feel free to shoot them our way. Patreon.com/takeyourtime, Dornology@gmail.com, YouTube.com/Dornology.
Yes.
Oh,
that reminds me. Sorry, I did have one last thing I wanted to read from Dornology@gmail.com.
Oh, there we go.
Adrian wrote in, and with the subject line, corn. I'm so tickled that my first email/comment regarding Take Your Time is a goof. Boiled corn sent from my iPhone.
Amazing.
Anyway, just wanted to leave it there.
Adrian, you said? Maybe when they get to this episode,
yeah,
2 years from now, you can send us another email.
Please let us know.
Love it. Thank you, everyone, again, for taking this journey with us. We'll be back next week with the final episode of the main season, before then the episode Aegis DLC after that. We love you all. I'm at Tom R. Marks on socials. He's at JM Dornbush. And again, we are gonna, it'll be a kickoff, a send off, right? Not a kickoff for the.
It'll be a kickoff to the end of the season.
Yeah. So yeah, hit us up. We'd still love to hear from you before that. And until then, we'll annihilate you later.